Okay, so what I'm gonna do is that what you just heard there was a pure, as pure can be, analog saw wave. So I'm gonna take that analog saw wave, go into an analog filter. Right. Now what I'll do is I'll take a digital synth here. Let's see, like what? I don't know, anything will do it. Like massive or something, which is not analog, and I'll match that frequency with a saw wave. So massive here consists of 3 oscillators and a modulation oscillator and all this stuff, but just for demo's sake, I'm going to use a single oscillator. So what I need to do is just match that note. If I can. Well, see, the analog one is slightly out of tune, because that's analog for you. I'm also going to change that envelope a bit. So we can actually hear it. Where's the voice envelope on it? Yeah, before, there it is. So I got it close, and this is something I tend to do a lot with analog synths is, you know, you have to reference your pitch to a digital synth because the digital synth will never be out of tune. So I'm gonna try my best to line up the pitch. Close enough. And the thing about analog is you don't necessarily want it precise because so this one is digital, and that's analog. So analog's giving it a little more warmth to it, even though I am running it through a low-pass filter, but the filter is wide open. But if I go direct out, oops. Let's get some volume down on that. So that's analog, and that's digital. Now, in a square wave, you're going to hear there's no filter being applied on this digital synth. It's actually bypassed. And it's pretty close because it's a saw. But when you start introducing things like filters, so say I put a low pass, a 4-pole low pass on that with no resonance. Then you'll hear the way that. Now it's hard to A and B it at the same time, but the way that works with this filter is if I you're gonna get you'll hear things like this ringing in the resonance in an analog filter. But in a digital filter, it's unless it's being oversampled a ridiculous amount of times, you're not going to get that kind of resonance in a filter, like a digital filter. It's close, but it's more, it's steppy. You can actually hear the steps in it as you're turning the... So the analog, there's no amount of steps. It's infinite. But with digital, you're obviously locked into certain increments of values due to the interpolation of the filter or the oversampling amount, which is basically the more oversampling, the more divisions it'll have within, you know, a filter step or an oscillator or something like that. That's what oversampling does. Some digital synths have oversampling that can come pretty close to recreating that, to the point where, shit, I wouldn't even be able to tell the difference, but then some don't and are just so obviously, blatantly digital that you can hear it a mile away. And this is another thing VSTs really choke at sometimes. This one, not so much, because it's actually well done, especially if you go to, in the options of this synth, is Steve's taken the time to do some really big oversampling, which is basically going to let you but as I reduce the sampling, that effect isn't going to be as good. And there are other synths that just absolutely suck at that kind of thing, and that's frequency modulation. So doing that with analog is actually a lot better, because then you can get really goofy with that kind of thing. Like, so what I was doing is I was just feeding a low oscillator to control a filter. What channel am I on again? 8. All right, sounds good. So if I go to 8, so there's my filter again. Now I could do that same thing with an analog synth. All I have to do is just patch the output of one oscillator into the input of that filter. It's the same thing. I was just clicking there and saying assign that LFO to this. Well, I can take that output and then go to the input of that other one, which is... So if I go down, that cycle is the pitch of this oscillator. So as I pitch this up, that's going to get faster and faster. But if I crank the range, like, that's analog, so there's no limit as to how quick you can do that. Well, past 20,000 hertz, which is, you couldn't hear anything after that anyway, but... So you wouldn't even notice it after that point, but... So that's just some of the sonic possibilities that, you know, are capable of using analog equipment, because you can get a certain type of sound out of Serum by doing that same kind of thing. So that same kind of routing, if I bypass the LFO on that and I just have my note again, then I want to say, oh, okay, I want this to be modulated by oscillator B. Just not quite the same, especially if I start changing the pitch. It's all locked to certain intervals. So if I FM from B, It's really accurate, which is sometimes not what you want. So you can hear that, the frequency of that oscillator, it's super low. But, I mean, it's super crazy precise, and you're not gonna get those weird random effects, you know, just by finding, you know, a range. You have a certain digital range between, you know, one note and the next, like over a semitone, it's like locked to a float, is what it's called. And in analog, there are no floats or integers or anything. It's just voltage level, which is, you know, going to give you a more range of control, like an infinite range of control, actually, as opposed to, you know, a finite range of control through digital. So actually here I have a recording of a few analog synths that I used in Snow Cone. So that sound there is from an old Prophet 10, and you know, just the way when I take the effect off it here, I had some EQ and compressor, but the dry input, it's just a really warm analog oscillator that you can't get, you know, with a digital synth. So there's some like machine dirt in there, all sorts of weird, just the nature of analog stuff. Where's another one? Like that one too. So this has been treated as well, but it's an analog recording of an Oscar here. An Oscar is a synth that's like about as old as me. And because it's that old, there's a lot of cake and like dirt crap in the potentiometer for the filter control. So turning that knob and recording and listening to it live, it's going to induce a lot of that kind of grit. So you hear that hiss, that a computer can't calculate that kind of stuff, you know, and know to put it in. Yeah, you could sample a long hiss noise and include it into your VST and then just kind of mix it in with it, but it's not analog, it's digital. So, and that weird detuning of the oscillator, it's like slightly out of tune. It's not an exact science with this thing, but it produces this kind of weirdness and out of tuneness and like more organic sounding, even though, yeah, it's electronic instrument, but a lot of variables, you know, are present because it's like, you know, it's just like if that thing's been sitting in a warehouse for 20 years, it's going to sound different, you know. And if you can, you know, find little bits and pieces of stuff like that and work it in your track, you know, it turns out like a cool little feature in here. So here I used it. You know, so, and it not only is it just, you know, it's got a certain sonic fidelity for it, and it gives it that kind of mood, but it also gives me the satisfaction that I actually went and created that sound from this like stuff and have my hands on it and had some like tactile feedback on the filter opening and then hit stop on the record and then brought it into my DAW, into my project, and then use that, you know. It's like, then I can say, hey, I didn't download that sound from somewhere, and no one else will ever be able to use that. No one will ever be able to make that sound. I guarantee you that. Because no one, well, sure, maybe someone has an Oscar, right? But good luck trying to recreate that patch. And then even if you did, good luck getting it to sound in the exact same old shit condition that's in.